Mrs. Shoup?
Here.
Mr. Fitzgerald? Mrs. Dinella?
Here.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Here.
Mr. Augustine?
Here.
Mr. Fodor?
Present.
Mr. Hack?
Here. Can I get a motion to excuse Tom?
I'll make a motion to excuse Tom Fitzgerald.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes carried. I need an agenda approval. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve agenda as submitted.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes carried. The invocation will be given by Councilman Jim Fodor. Mr. Stanton.
Almighty God, you have set before us the responsibility of the city. We ask for your guidance and direction, that we, the members of council, may do what is best for the people that live here. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I get a motion to pass the minutes from the regular council meeting, 3/4/19? And executive work session 3/4/19, and we have the executive session approved.
I'd like to make a motion to approve regular meeting 3/4/19, work session 3/4/19, and special meeting 2/28/19.
Second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Dinella?
Yes.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Yes.
Mr. Augustine?
Yes.
Mr. Fodor?
Yes.
Mrs. Shoup?
Yes.
Mr. Hack?
Yes. Okay, this is our public comments from our visitors. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand. And when you speak, please use the podium. Clearly state your name and address into the microphone. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any dialogue must be conducted through me as president, although your comments or questions be addressed to the council administration both. Yes, sir.
Zach Weaver, 921 Gorge Drive, Inter Avenue. It's been a while since I've been to my last meeting. I apologize for that. I try to come as often as possible. But I wanted to review one item from the last time I was here. My company, Rockwood Manor LLC, has completed the purchase of the old Harvey Mansion. During the year prior to our purchase, there were 43 calls for police services at that property. In the following 6 months since our purchase, there has been exactly 1 call for police services. We own 29 rental units within the city, and we exclusively buy distressed and poorly managed properties. All of our properties have tenants that pass background checks and have income. I believe generally we improve the neighborhoods that we operate in, which makes me frustrated with numerous issues that the city finds with my properties. I received a call this weekend from Republic Services. They received a letter from the city of Painesville instructing cancellation of waste services at my property at 374 South St. Clair. It was due to our property being a 4-unit commercial property and not residential. The city is correct in their letter. It is a commercial property and it's not residential and shouldn't have residential service. I find this to be petty and a complete waste of our resources as a city. We have time to address trash cans, but we don't have time to address real issues that actually affect the residents of the city. My tenants complained for 6 months about the drug activity across the street. Nothing was ever done. Not even after the shooting and the subsequent evacuation of the neighborhood during the standoff with the SWAT team. The property adjacent to mine needs to be condemned. I have complained in the past about the skunks living under the collapsed deck in the backyard of this property. The collapsed structure was removed, and that's it. The condition of the property has not changed. I sent some pictures of this property to Ms. Jenkins and Ms. Ireland to show with the council. I did not have time to print them out before I came today, and I apologize for that. My point is not to get my neighbors in trouble, but it's to point out the extremely differential and occasionally preferential treatment that some in the city receive and others do not. I have addressed these concerns with Mr. Lewis, and I trust that he will work on these issues. However, I wanted to make the council as a whole aware of my concerns. I currently have an opportunity to continue investing in this community, and I cannot because my business partners will not allow me to continue buying properties in Painesville. I would like to continue operating here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that want to talk? Yes, sir.
Mike Fay, 531 South State Street. Mr. Hack might comment, I want to talk to Mr. Fodor. My question is, would you stick up and defend the city even if you knew it was in the wrong?
Your comments to
Mr. Hack, could you please, I guess Mike here, last week's closing comments seemed like they might have something to do with our case. I've been sitting here 5 or 6 years of meetings, and nothing has ever sounded like it had anything to do with our situation. We called a meeting with the city, and then last week's closing comments or last meetings, it really sounded like something. The comment was made that we don't want to get stopped halfway through for the wrong permits, and that wasn't the case with our thing. It just seemed coincidental that last week's closing comments, last meeting, excuse me, may have had something to do with our situation. It just seemed too coincidental to where, I guess I'm just trying to get clarity. And my question was, it sounds like people will stick up for the city even when they do know it's in the wrong. And I guess it's more of a statement, not a question. So, thanks.
Thank you. All right,
Is it okay if I say something?
Well, it's up to the president of council, but you can respond at the time you have an opportunity to respond to the conclusion of the meeting.
Okay.
all right, thank you. Committee reports, safety committee.
That's me. All right, so we met Tuesday, March 12th. We were given some statistics. Between 2000 and 2018, the city has seen significant growth, as many of us know. We've increased by 1,425 housing units in the city. From the 2000 to the 2010 census, we added 9.74% to our population. And then from 2010 to July 2017, we grew an additional 1.4%. All of this data is to then go on to discuss our safety services and how those numbers have affected our safety services. Obviously, hopefully we're all familiar with the studies that have been done on the fire department. And ultimately, all of those studies have concluded that something needs to change in order for our fire to meet the needs and expectations of our community, as well as meet the standards necessary for their accrediting body. We discussed some personnel options, as well as a grant opportunity to help cover some of those costs. I would anticipate in the future that those personnel options will be discussed further. We did talk about the SAFER grant, and as a city, we've determined to wait until next year's round, when we've allowed the ability to budget to apply for that grant. For the police department, Monica presented a 5-year plan that would be tied to a 2 mil levy. We discussed that plan and how the interrelation of that plan between the fire needs and the police levy would happen. The committee as a whole feels that the police levy and the impact that it would have is very important, and we directed staff to organize a council work session in April. I believe that has been scheduled for April 8th at 5:30 p.m. So we will be discussing the recommendations for that levy, the 5-year plan, and what that would possibly do to assist police and fire in being able to meet the needs of our community. And that's it.
Thank you. Lenny, Commission.
Good evening. Our planning commission met on Thursday, March 14th. They heard 2 conditional use permit requests. The first was for a telecommunications tower at 206 Chestnut. That item was tabled. The commission would like additional information regarding that site selection for that area. The other item was for a conditional use to allow the Lake County Board of Commissioners, specifically the clerk of county courts, to use the building at 50 Liberty Street for office and document storage. It had been previously used in that manner. Their permit expired after 4 years. They renewed their lease and asked the commission to allow them to have their public use at that location again. The same terms will apply. It will be a 4-year conditional use permit. After after 2 years, they would come back to the commission, explain what their long-term plans are for record storage, and then in 4 years, it'll be expired. The city council should have received a notification regarding this recommendation, and there's a 15-day period where you can call it up for a public hearing as well. Any questions?
No, thank you. We'll move into legislation. If you wish to comment on legislation, you must request to do so at this time. Those making such a request will then be called upon after the reading. Any dialogue must be conducted through me as council president, although your comments or questions be addressed to the council administration in full. So we have ordinance number 1, first reading, and resolution number 2, third reading. Resolution number 3, second reading. See none, we'll move into ordinance number 1, first reading.
An ordinance to authorize the city of Painesville to enter into a contract with the American Municipal Power Incorporated for participation into the Efficiency Smart Program.
Okay, good evening. I brought the folder with all the papers that we've been through. This is really just an introduction for the legislation to start the process. I'm here to represent that, would recommend that we move it forward.
Any additional questions or comments? Any motion? Go ahead.
I would like to see
First
this
reading.
first reading.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, yes, I agree. I'm sorry.
I do have, I
Yes.
just thought of a question, I apologize for being late on it. But is there information that can be posted on the website at this point for the residents to see, or is it already there?
It's already there.
It's already there. I apologize, thank you.
Thank you. Resolution number 2.
A resolution authorizing and directing the city manager to advertise for bids and enter into a contract including any and all ensuing change orders with the lowest and best bidder for the Pine Hill Waterline construction and declaring an emergency.
Here to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions, concerns? Can I get a motion?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Yes.
Mr. Augustine?
Yes.
Mr. Fodor?
Yes.
Mrs. Shute?
Yes.
Mrs. Sinello?
Yes.
Mr. Hack?
Yes, resolution 2 passes. Resolution number 3, second reading.
A resolution authorizing and directing the city manager to advertise for bids and enter into a contract including any and all ensuing change orders with the lowest and best bidder for the asphalt resurfacing of Cedar Brook Drive and Bank Street and declaring an emergency.
Resurfacing of Cedar Brook Drive is from Summington to Monroe, and the asphalt resurfacing for Bay Street Drive, or Bay Street, I'm sorry, is from Five Points to Walnut, East Walnut.
Any comments or questions?
I do have one question. So I know that currently, or I believe that currently Bank Street is rated for heavy trucks.
It is home manufacturing.
Okay. Is that going to, when they redo the road, are they going to continue to meet those standards? Or will it not be necessary because of the lack of manufacturing on that road?
It will still meet those standards. All we're doing is milling off the asphalt that's there. There's concrete underneath it. There's like 2 inches of concrete underneath the asphalt surface. And so it'll still have the structural integrity for trucks.
Thank you.
Leave us on for a third reading or not? All right, we'll leave this on for a third reading. Nice. All right, unfinished business, we have none. New business, none. Departmental presentation, community involvement.
Good evening. From the Community Development Department. Better for me to flip or down?
I'm getting it.
So we're going to need to see you at the podium.
Hold on.
The Community Development Department, for those who may not know, is made up of the Building Department, Code Enforcement or Housing Department, Engineering Division, and we work very closely with the Planning Division and also Zoning Administration. Okay. Just to give you an idea of some of the departmental highlights from 2018, in our mission statement, Community Development Department's mission is to guide the development of the city through effective measures of planning, design review, construction plan approval, code compliance, and housing assistance to preserve and enhance the quality of life for the residents of the city of Painesville. Some of the major accomplishments that we were working on throughout last year were we worked with City Sphere to develop a new software program that really integrates building, zoning, engineering, and code enforcement. We anticipate that will be completed by July of this year. We have developed standard operating procedures because that's one of the things that we're looking at in each one of the departments for code enforcement and vacant property inspections. One of the things that we will be doing as part of the standard operating procedures is we will be walking every street in the city twice. That's to identify vacant properties and also identify any property maintenance violations that may occur. So we want to clean up the city, address those property maintenance violations, and the best way to do that is by walking each street. So we have 2 inspectors currently. There's about 7,100 houses in the city of Painesville, and we break the community up into 2 sections. The south section, 1 inspector inspects, and the north section, so they will be walking the streets, as I said, not in that way, but for property maintenance issues, to identify property maintenance issues. We have established a process to review commercial and industrial plans. In the past, we had contracted out for that. We're currently contracting with Safe Built. Safe Built has cut the review time down from roughly 30 days to around 14 days. And we've also brought residential plan review is in-house, which saves us approximately $5,000 a year for residential plan review. We have completed 1,552 residential Code of Ohio inspections. That's with 2 part-time inspectors and our chief building official, who is also part-time, that we contract out with through Safe Build. And we've completed 360 Ohio Building Code, which is our industrial or commercial inspection. So through the residential and then also the industrial or commercial. But we do the building, electrical, and HVAC. Plumbing, we contract out with Safe Build to do. We submitted 7 properties for demolition through Lake County Land Revitalization Court or Reutilization Court. We've also issued 45 permits for new residential construction. That's quite a few. I mean, in comparison to last year, into prior years where we may have done 25 to 35. We have also issued 39 permits for new commercial and industrial and for improvements for a total valuation of $7.1 million. So in total, it's roughly around $13 million in improvements. Research, one of the major projects that we worked on last year was researching and developing the new TIF for the Limeco property, and that will generate funding for the interchange that's being proposed at State Route 44. We had to work with the schools to get their approval on that as well. And submitted an application to NOACA for funding through Painesville Transportation and Connectivity Plan from Lake Erie College to Kiwanis Recreation Park. those are some of the major accomplishments that we've had in 2018. As far as property maintenance is concerned, one of the things that when we're looking at property maintenance violations and what we've done in that particular area, weeds, re-inspections, and inspections were very high last year at around, between the two of them, around 1,600 inspections we've done for weeds. That's new and re-inspections. Main areas that I do want to point out that we saw a major increase in is the new or interior housing inspections. There were 52 last year. That is way up in comparison to what we have done in prior years. And that is very extensive, and it typically requires an administrative search warrant in order to do the internal inspections. The other thing that I want to mention is the court appearances and the court referrals. So if you look, I mean, there were 258 court appearances and 71 referrals. That is extremely high in comparison to prior years where we may have done 10. The main reason for that is we are handling the garbage complaints now. So those individuals who are not paying to have their garbage picked up through Republic Services, they are being referred after they're given notice. If they don't contact Republic, sign up, then they're being referred to court. So that's why we had a number of, or a huge increase in court appearances. Vehicles is another area. Just need to say you cannot park your vehicle in your front yard in the city of Painesville, or you cannot have junk vehicles. They need to be in storage. So that is significantly higher than typically the 75 to 100 that we have done in prior years. And then vacant property registration. You'll see that with vacant property registration, we sent 510 letters basically to identify vacant properties. One of the reasons that you see such a large increase in that is because we started working with the utilities department, as council had asked for, identifying those individuals or properties that have had zero consumption for 3 months. So we sent out letters to those individuals informing them of the vacant property ordinance and the need to register their property. So I expect, a significant decrease this year from what we saw last year due to the fact that we were identifying them. We are caught up, and that number should go down significantly in the upcoming year. As far as our regular property maintenance inspections and re-inspections, basically that's about where we have been in the past. So we're keeping fairly consistent with where we have been in past years. Just to mention, since we're coming into grass season, that we have an ordinance regarding high grass and rank vegetation, which individuals are allowed up to 6 inches or higher on any developed residentially zoned property. So grass can be up to 6 inches high on a residentially zoned property, 12 inches or higher on all other land. So vacant property or not a vacant property, but a vacant lot basically can be up to 12 inches high. We send one notice a year at the beginning of the year, we don't send any additional reminders. They'll receive one notice at the beginning of the year to let them know that they are in violation. They'll be given typically we provide 7 days to mow. We go out and inspect it again. If it hasn't been mowed, then we order it inspected. When they come out to cut it, they also measure it, provide pictures for us, and documentation that it has not been mowed and is over what is required. essentially, what we charge is, we charge the cost of the mow to the residents, and we charge a $75 administrative fee for re-inspections and administrative costs. So typically, you can see at the very bottom, the average price of mowing was $95.24. We did cut roughly 300 properties last year and billed out $28,000 for mowing. I think the important thing to know is it's much cheaper for a resident to mow their property than it is for us to come and actually have to mow it for them. So we would encourage people to mow it, and if they have some difficulties, please contact us, let us know, and we will work with them. Leanne Exum, who is our city engineer, will speak next on the engineering division.
So in 2018, we're just going to do a recap of the projects that we have completed. We did the asphalt resurfacing of Richmond Street, the reconstruction of Walnut Avenue from Menor Avenue to Lynn, the 2018 road improvement program, Transit Street and Pearl Street, the 2018 sidewalk improvement program, the resurfacing of West Jackson Street design, St. Clair Street parking lot design, Bank Street retaining wall feasibility study, Menor Avenue and West Jackson Street storm sewer improvements design, North Park Place streetscape design, North Park Place roadway improvement design. And then in 2019, Okay, in 2019, we're going to be doing the following projects. So the Maplewood Basin Improvement is a project that involves draining the existing pond, dredging and grading the pond, and the installation of a new culvert under the railroad. The Menor Jackson storm sewer improvements includes the installation of approximately 1,820 feet of 12-inch diameter to 24-inch diameter storm sewer pipe, fill and plug or remove approximately 1,155 linear feet of existing storm sewer, the installation of approximately 25 catch basins and 15 manholes, and the removal of approximately 13 catch basins and manholes. The reconnection of existing storm lateral connections along with approximately 15 cleanouts. This project also includes the repair of the culvert under Jackson Street. North Park Place streetscape includes the streetscape enhancements, including landscaping, core sidewalk pavers, decorative lighting, and stormwater quality improvements at the northeast corner of Veterans Park. And then the North Park Place roadway improvement is tied to that streetscape improvement. The work covered by this contract includes the replacement of concrete pavement with brick pavement, curb replacement, and stormwater improvements at the northeast corner of Veterans Park. The St. Clair Street parking lot includes the installation of a retaining wall, reinforced curb, storm sewer and catch basins, and the surfacing and striping of the parking lot located adjacent to Victoria Place where the old parking garage was located. Jackson Street sanitary sewer lining is the lining of approximately 5 sections of sanitary sewer for a total of 1,113 feet. Resurfacing of Cedarbrook Drive and Bank Street. Cedarbrook Drive will be resurfaced from Southington Boulevard to the Road Boulevard. Bank Street will be resurfaced from State Street at the 5 Points intersection to East Walnut Street. Cedarbrook 84. Skinner Avenue design. Burgess & Michael is currently working on the Skinner Avenue design. The project entails replacing the water line, underground installation, and resurfacing of Skinner Avenue. Bank Street retaining wall. The engineering department is currently working with the Army Corps of Engineers to replace a portion of the Bank Street retaining wall. For the sidewalk program, we have identified sections of sidewalk that are not in compliance throughout the city. We will be replacing sidewalks that are the city's responsibility this year. The resurfacing of West Jackson Street. The engineering department applied for and was awarded a grant from NOACA to resurface West Jackson Street from the city court line to Richmond Street. This project will be administered and inspected by ODOT. Sanford Street reconstruction design. My senior engineer, Bob Barco, is working on designing the reconstruction of Sanford Street from Skinner to Richmond. This project will include cement stabilization and paving, new curb and under drain, and the reprofiling of the roadway.
Ms. White?
Good evening. Valerie.
He has the clicker, don't look at me. Tell us what you want.
These are the various items that were brought before the Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals. As a city planner, it is my job to take these items and give the recommendation as they apply to our comprehensive plan and our zoning code. As you see, the Planning Commission met 10 times. We had one rezoning request, which was denied. Or actually, it was actually withdrawn. I'm sorry, it was withdrawn. There were 5 new conditional use permits, which varied from the Painesville Dental on Manor Avenue and the NRP Group project over on Manor Avenue by the Y. 545 East Erie was a conditional use permit for a grocery store at the corner of Elm and Erie. Just so you know, they have submitted plans and they have started doing interior renovations at that location. Reviews and renewals include the Steel Mansion for their in operation, Lakeview Bluffs for the Elm Street property where they're doing the soil removal and the remediation. Ola for their conditional use permit request that they received over on North State Street across from St. Mary's. Temporary use permits included the Gage Home for doing temporary events at the Gage House. The temporary structures that were put in place for the construction of 158 East Jackson for the Lake County Building and Grounds facility, as well as the temporary trailers that were put in at the Y for the storage of the senior center tables and chairs. We had one design review, which was related to the Painesville demo. And then on the right is the Board of Zoning Appeals. They met 7 times. They heard 12 variances. And I put up there the variances that were heard the most dealt with parking, setbacks for parking lots, or garage requirements for properties that had were considered non-conforming and needed to put in a garage and did not have available land to locate garages. The non-conforming chapter, which is 1139, there were 3 requests to allow for expansions. Additionally, there in the 2018 development, this kind of goes along with what Mr. Lewis talked about, all the development projects that they issued building permits for. Of those, the largest are Eckerd America and Aero Fluids. The total of all of those projects was close to $7 million. Valerie, the next one is our business occupancies. I did a calculation. There was 47 business occupancy permits that were applied for last year. A lot of them include those that you see up there. There are also properties or businesses that go under different ownership. So they would need to fill out a new business occupancy permit application to allow them to continue the use. For 2018, those are all of our zoning permits that were issued. The majority of them were fences and accessory structures that include sheds and garages. And that's it. I noticed that on that slide, Mr. Lewis is missing. I just wanted to mention that, thank you, Doug, for time with us here in the city.
Thank you.
And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Okay.
So a couple questions. Do we, when we get, not necessarily complaints, although we do get complaints, when we get complaints versus when our inspectors find issues throughout the city, do we have a process to prioritize who is more of an issue than others?
I would have to look back through it, but yes, the SOP, specifically defines where the complaint comes from and what priority it is. So council, obviously, if we're receiving complaints from council or residents, those are receiving priority over something that typically a inspector would go out and inspect. Then there are different types, there are different types of issues. So if it deals with illegal dumping, and it's occurring at the time, then basically that would be something that was an immediate priority because it was occurring. So if it was called in, that would be a priority. If it was something dealing with a police issue and they had called it in, then that becomes a priority for the code enforcement officers. But it is spelled out in the our standard operating procedures. We do have a priority listing.
And then, I have a couple, sorry. So I noticed weeds, grass, that kind of stuff, that takes up over 25% of the things that we deal with. Is that accurate?
When grass is growing,
Yeah.
it's extensive because I wondered, I wasn't clicking and I saw things clicking, sorry.
She's going back to the slide.
When grass is growing, it takes up a considerable amount of time for the inspectors. So when they are out, however, if they do notice, the property needs mowed and it has other violations, it's just as easy to identify the additional violations and issue a letter for all violations for that specific property.
Okay. And then, for the vacant property, you had said that we did a comprehensive thing last year. But then you also mentioned that they were going, and that we utilized the zero utility usage over 3 months. But when you were talking about the inspectors, walking the neighborhoods, you mentioned that that was one of the things they were going to be looking for. Is that accurate?
Yes, that will be one of the things that they continue to look for. Just to verify, so when they're out doing inspections, they'll continue to look for, vacant properties, even though we're able to identify it through the zero usage reports that utility provides to us every single month.
Okay. And then, 2 more. It's appropriate that we're having this presentation tonight when we have Zach Weaver with his garbage issue. What is the process that identifies properties as being commercial versus residential and communicates that to our garbage person?
It is the number of units, typically 1 to 3 units under our refuse contract is a residential, it's considered residential. 4 and over would be considered commercial.
Okay. And was that not identified to the garbage collection agency when they took over our contract?
That was,
Okay.
yes.
So, okay. And then the last thing was just a point of clarification. You talked about junk vehicles. And I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on this, that junk vehicles don't necessarily mean that it's a crappy broken down car. A junk vehicle can also be an currently non-street legal, so it's not properly plated, it doesn't have appropriate tags, all that stuff, correct?
Flat tires, things of that nature,
Yeah.
so if it's
Up on cinders.
yes, if it's not operating and it is not currently licensed, then it would be considered a junk vehicle.
Well, and I think that last part is very important for our residents to know, because I think a lot of times people are like, well, it's my summer car or it's my project car, I don't need to plate it, I'm not driving it, I'm just keeping it in my driveway. Well, it's illegal per our ordinance to have it out in visible location,
Correct.
unplated.
Typically, it would have to be put in a garage or undercover.
Yeah, okay.
That's it for me.
Any other questions?
Couple questions. On the rank vegetation side, we talked about residential. But what about businesses?
The same.
So it falls in the same
Correct.
expectation,
It-
same height, same all
The
that?
rank vegetation, if it's 6 inches or higher for, well, yes, it does say any developed residentially zoned property, but it is also for commercial or industrial, as long as it's occupied. If it's a vacant lot, it can be up to 12 inches high.
And that's the same in business for industrial areas where it's vacant, right? And then I guess I always get confused by this, and I don't know why it's not clear to me, but if we have 71 court report referrals, how is it we have 258 appearances? It seems like we have almost three times more appearances than we actually have referrals. So how does that actually happen?
Okay. What happens is that when a property is cited in court, sometimes they won't show up. So we'll have to have, they'll be cited in court again, or a warrant will be issued for them. Typically not, but they'll be requested to come back to court. In some cases, I've shown up, 5 times, because it's a progression thing. If they come back, have they done what the judge brings them back to ask them if they've done, how are they progressing on addressing the property maintenance violation. So he can give them additional time to comply with his orders, basically, or the property maintenance code. And many times, as long as they are showing progress and complying with the ordinance, then we'll come back again until it's finally resolved.
So you could have more than one appearance?
Correct.
Or one referral?
Yes.
I gotcha. Thanks.
Christine, you have a question? No? All right. Thank you for the report. We'll move into our administrative reports. Law Director? City Manager?
Nothing additional.
Clerk of Council? Correspondence?
The next regular council meeting will be held Monday, April 1st at 7:30. Recreation is holding a March Madness Skills Challenge on March 30th for boys and girls ages 5 to 12 at Lake Erie College Jerome T. Osborne Family Athletic and Wellness Center from 1 o'clock to 3 p.m. The first Friday's event kicks off Friday, April 5th from 4:30 to 7:30. The event is Once Upon a Princess and will be held on Main Street. There will be a different princess located at each participating store on Main Street. The annual Breakfast with the Bunny and Easter egg hunt is April 13th, beginning at 8:30 a.m. in Painesville Square.
I mean, here's a date for the, listen for the date for the princess thing.
April 5th.
Closing comments by council. Katie?
Well, I just wanted, I thought it was very appropriate that the two guests that spoke at the beginning spoke to essentially a community development, which was the presentation that we had tonight. I don't know if you guys planned that, but it was very fitting. And I just wanted to say, I know, there's usually very specific areas that individuals complain about municipally. Sometimes it's safety services, sometimes it's community development, sometimes it's utilities. And the city has been working very hard on improving customer service, on meeting the needs of all the residents and all the people that we do business with. And I'm hoping that we can come to a positive resolution with both of you. And that if not, you'll reach out to me or any other council person that's at the table. Because I know we care about our city and we care about the people that develop and invest in it. So thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you. Lori?
I was just going to take a minute to talk about lawnmowers because one of my biggest concerns has always been that we begin looking at rank vegetation before anybody even gets a chance to get their mowers up and running. So this is my plug for getting your mower up and running. That's all.
Christine?
Yeah, I just want to thank police department for putting that little speed thing that tells me how fast I'm going down Skinner. Because the first time I saw it, I hit it at 36. And I thought, ooh. And a big smiley face when I slammed on my brakes and hit 25. So nobody was behind me, thank heaven. But anyway, thank you for that. I'm excited about it. And my question was, why was it so high on the pole so that nobody steals it? So that's kind of why. But it's wonderful to see anybody going down Skinner coming from St. Clair towards Sanford, beware.
You can get up to 88 to do
I did not get 88. Too long. Not get 88 on Skinner. 36 is about the max.
All right, thank you. Jim?
Just a couple things. According to my comment from last week about permits was not directed at any one individual. It's just at certain times of the year, council people get phone calls. In the wintertime, we get them on sidewalk and snow plowing, and, they push the snow across the street in my front yard, they covered up the sidewalk, and things of that nature. In the springtime, we start hearing about, because people start looking at their property, and the next thing you know is they repaired a fence, built a shed, put it in a pool, and before I was in council, I was on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and you always hear after the fact. And if you build something after you get a permit, there could be a fine doubling the cost, if I'm not mistaken. So permits are an issue in the spring, as well as, I believe April 1st starts yard waste with, April 15th?
15.
Okay, is it April
Yes,
15th?
I believe
or
it's
17th?
15.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had that right. Because I know that, people are starting to rake their yards and fill the bags and starting setting them out to the front lawn. Well, they aren't gonna be picked up for a month or so you might wanna rethink on how you're gonna get rid of that. The other part of providing hope for a city, if there's one thing that throughout the time here, what people look for in a city are, number one thing, are schools. Then the second thing are the roads and infrastructure, how do you get to and from your house. And then the last thing is housing stock. Now, the schools, the city doesn't have a huge interaction with, because that's the schools, and they're responsible for test scores and so forth. But the road infrastructure and housing stock, that's what we get the responsibility for. So creating that hope for people that if you buy a house in your neighborhood, that the other individuals in your neighborhood are gonna cut the grass, not park on the front lawn, not have a deck or something like that that's deteriorating. And so it's a large undertaking. And I know at times, it seems like the city is kind of backwards in how they're doing things. But I think in the last 8 years that I've been on council, we're trying to put a plan in place, better streets, better water lines with dedicated funding, and then as well as, you could see from today's data that was presented, there's a whole bunch of permits going out there, inspections being done. And the problem when you start doing inspections, when you go on the street and you cite one person, then all of a sudden it's, well, what about this house, this house, this house, and this house? And, we're trying to get to everything. It's kind of like when you're speeding down Route 2 and the officer pulls you over. And the next thing you know is all these cars are whizzing by. And you go, what about those guys? Or those girls? And you say, well, the officer says, I'm doing the best I can, and today's your lucky day. So at this point in time, keep in contact with us. We do have cards. I have cards that I'll be more than happy to have you take, and you can take several others and give them to your neighbors, and my phone number's on there. Or stop over at 67 Charlotte Street. I know my wife will be thrilled. And just, we'll sit on the front porch, you can tell me about it, and we'll see what we can do. But I know Doug and the rest of the department heads and Monica are a great place to start as well. I think if you do check the internet, and that's where I got the April 1st.
Yes.
It is April 1st, and that's not April Fool's Day. If you set it out, they'll actually take it. And I guess at this point in time, that's all I got, and we'll turn it over to the new dad.
That's it for me today.
Sleep deprivation.
I just want to let you know that I was privileged enough to work with the Council on Aging. I went on a Meals on Wheels for 2 hours and took 15 meals to people in Gainesville. And I just want to let you know a little bit about the Council on Aging this week across Lake County. 5 nutrition sites will be served, 3,557 of home delivery meals just in Lake County to 604 seniors and nearly 300 generous volunteers. And they prepared meals or drive 45 routes each day. Also, 565 sit-down meals will be served at 3 locations. So again, Council on Aging, thank you for doing all this. And at this point, I get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?